There's an insurance commercial featuring a couple seated on the couch in their living room. They tell us that they love their new home. It has so much space. We even have a guest room now. But we have ants. Ant number 1 enters and says, "You're slouching again, Ted." Aunt Bonnie picks up items in the fridge and declares, "Expired, expired, expired." Another ant wipes dust off of a shelf and says, "It's a lot of house. Hope you can keep it clean." We'd rather our ants, or anyone who visits us, to tell us, "You have a lovely home." That's how the psalmist describes the temple of God. How lovely is your dwelling place. In 1 Kings, Solomon feels a sense of accomplishment as the temple is completed. Building the temple has been a dream for years. His father David wanted to build the temple. But God told David no, that his son would build it instead. The plans were made, measurements for each section of the temple, materials to be used for each part of the building, for the decor, for the tools and instruments that would be used to help carry out each ritual and practice. Meticulous planning and preparation. Now all of it has come together. The builders and laborers and craftspeople are finished. What a moment. Solomon calls all the people together to mark this moment. They will bring up the Ark of the Covenant of God, the very sign of God's presence among the people, and place it in the most holy place. When they put the ark there, a cloud fills the house of the Lord. It is so thick, so full that the priests cannot even stand. In those moments, God reminds the Israelites and us that God is mystery, beyond our ability to understand, beyond our ability to contain. Thanks be to God. Still, Solomon builds the temple, a house for God, a place where God will dwell. The psalmist sings of the joy of going to the temple, of wanting to spend time there in the courts of the Lord, the house of God. The temple is not meant to contain God. It is representative, a place to encounter God and a reminder that God does not dwell in only one place. The temple is what the Celtic people are often credited with calling a thin space, a place where the barrier between God and the people is especially thin, and God is accessible in a particular way. Where have we encountered these thin spaces in our own lives? In a 2012 article, journalist Eric Weiner describes thin places. A thin place is not necessarily a tranquil place or a fun one or even a beautiful one, though it may be all of those things too. Thin places relax us, yes. They also transform us, or more accurately, unmask us. In thin places, we become our more essential selves. He talks about how travel has taken him to many thin places. St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, a Sikh temple in New Delhi, the tomb of the poet Rumi in Turkey, a tiny Buddhist village in Nepal. He says thin places are often sacred ones, but they need not be. At least not in the conventional sense. A park or even a city square can be a thin place. In the early weeks and months of the pandemic, when traveling wasn't an option, I started walking more. I would take breaks from work to walk around my neighborhood. It gave me time to think, to clear my mind, or to wrestle with whatever idea I was working on at the time. I wrestled with how to keep people connected, how to care for others in ways that were safe, from a distance, making sure we didn't breathe on each other. All things that were new then and have become commonplace now. On these walks, I started to notice, as if for the first time, the flowers and signs of life all around me. I was in my little neighborhood. I wasn't anywhere exotic or very exciting. And I saw beautiful blooms in orange and white, pink and purple, yellow and blue, every shade of green imaginable. I would notice these flowers and plants and feel such a deep sense of thankfulness. I'd take out my phone and snap a picture. Now, I'm not a good photographer, and I don't know what I thought I'd do with those pictures. I'm not even sure why I took them, except that I wanted to hold on to those glimpses of beauty, those moments of awe and wonder, those thin spaces that reminded me of God's presence. Why didn't I notice them before? How often do I miss them now? How do we get to these thin places, these places where God's dwelling and our dwelling seem to overlap and intersect? Eric Weiner explains, you don't plan a trip to a thin place, you stumble upon one. But there are steps you can take to increase the odds of an encounter with thinness. Our psalmist offers these steps as beatitudes. Happy are those who live in your house, ever singing your praise. Happy are those whose strength is in you. Happy is everyone who trusts in you. Now we can hear that and get stuck on happy, happy, happy. Doesn't feel realistic or even very helpful when we're dealing with times of fear or grief or pain or uncertainty. Kind of sounds like we're saying God's people are supposed to be happy. These Beatitudes, like the ones we're more familiar with in the New Testament, can also be read as blessed are. Blessed are those who live in your house. Blessed are those whose strength is in you. Blessed is everyone who trusts in you. And just like with our more familiar Beatitudes, we may be challenged with these words. Learning to live, to dwell with God, learning that our strength is in God, learning to trust. These are all things we learn over time. They are slow and steady work. We may trust God today, and we will learn to trust God more in the days ahead. We have felt God's strength carry us through before, and we know God's strength will hold us up again. We are ever learning how to live, how to dwell as God's people in this time and place. If you search for the word dwell on the internet, one of the first things that comes up is a site for apartment and home design ideas. How to decorate, how to make the best use of your space. You can buy furniture on the site and lighting and learn how to turn an unused fireplace into an aquarium. All that we could ever need to know and more about where we dwell, about our homes. Our homes all look different. We live in dorm rooms and trailer parks, in apartments and houses, on farms and in cities, alone and in crowded spaces. The places we live, the places we stay are as different as we are. So we might ask, where do you feel at home? And again, we could answer with lots of different things. The place where I sleep, in a stadium I know well, cheering on my favorite team, on a campus where we spend much of our time, with family, out in the woods, working in the yard, working on a quilt, being with a friend. Those places where, or those people with whom we feel safe, free to stay, free to be ourselves. Solomon says, I have built you a house, a place for you to dwell in forever. And the psalmist says, "How lovely is your home. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts." So we might ask, where does God live? Where is God's dwelling place? That's a big question to answer. My friend John went to a restaurant. He ordered his meal, and the server asked, "What would you like for your side? Fries, macaroni and cheese, onion rings, fried okra?" And John answered, "Yes." Where is God's dwelling place? The answer is yes. This is the God who is I am. God's dwelling place is. Is it in the church building? Yes. Is it on the beach or in the mountains? Yes. Is it in the face of the newborn child or the hands of the elderly? Yes. Are you God's dwelling place? Am I? Are we? Yes. All of these places and more. One paraphrase of Solomon's prayer puts it like this: can it be that God will actually move into our neighborhood? Yes. Solomon says, even heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you, much less this house that I have built. Most of us aren't building structures to house God or contain God. Like Solomon, we realize this isn't possible. We love our sanctuary, this church building where we gather to worship, the beautiful stained glass windows, the music, our church family. All of these things point us to God and hopefully help us worship God in this place. We're often reminded in this place that God is here, and not only here. Auburn First Baptist Church does not contain or explain God, and neither does any other church. I wonder, what ways do we try to contain God? The Israelites might have said, "Surely God cannot dwell in the foreigner." We hear Solomon pray, "O God, listen to the prayers of the foreigner and do all that the foreigner asks you." God must be there, dwelling, even in the foreigner. We might say, "Surely God cannot dwell in this person who thinks differently from me. Surely God cannot dwell in this idea that makes me question or doubt." It's easy for us to think, surely God cannot dwell in the place that is racked by war and violence and injustice. Surely God cannot dwell in tragedy, in a devastating diagnosis, in grief, in pain, and the list goes on. God is all around us. There is no place where God is not. In another psalm, we read, "If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you." I don't believe that God causes bad things to happen. I do believe that God is there with us, loving, caring, providing, walking with us, and holding us close. Rachel's little boy, Alan, was just learning to walk. He toddled around and was so proud of himself when he took a few steps. As he was walking across some gravel outside, he fell, began crying. He was more frightened and embarrassed than physically hurt, and Rachel scooped him up into her arms, and gently rocked him as he wailed and big tears slid down his cheeks. A few years later, Alan was ready for the training wheels to come off of his bike. He knew how to ride fast, and he couldn't wait to ride faster. Rachel removed the training wheels and encouraged him to be careful. She helped him learn to ride without them, and he picked it up in no time. One day, he fell off his bike. He scraped up the whole side of his leg and skinned his elbows. He came home to his mom, and Rachel carefully cleaned each scrape and scratch. She bandaged him up and kept an eye on his wounds over the next few days. A few years later, when Alan started middle school, his seat was in the back of the classroom. He realized he couldn't see the board where the teacher was writing. He had to get glasses. When it was time to go to school with his new glasses, he was worried. What if people laughed or made fun of him? Rachel assured him that it would be okay, reminding him of how special he was and how much she loved him. Well, middle school is hard, and kids can be mean. His classmates did make fun of him. They bullied him and laughed at him, and he felt miserable. He waited until he got home, and then he cried. It wasn't fair. These were supposed to be his friends. Why was everyone so mean? Rachel listened and encouraged him, and somehow they got through that year together. Like a parent whose child is sick or skins their knee or gets bullied, the parent doesn't and would never cause any of that to happen. The parent is there, loving, caring, providing, listening, walking with, and holding close. As immeasurable as a parent's love for a child is, how much more is God's indescribable love for us? God dwells. God's love dwells. God has moved into our neighborhood, and God will stay. Amen.